it's Leo Aerodor here with a quick Machinist guide that I wasn't initially going to make, but Lace Valerius deleted all of his guides, so I figured I'd quickly make one. I still haven't replaced my microphone, by the way, so I'm going to admit the quality is not the best. My win ratio has seen better days. Unfortunately, I was out for a couple of seasons, so I had to start from silver, and I tried to climb as Bard, and it was just a nightmare from silver. But anyway, on to why we're actually here quickly. So, going to sort of jump straight into sort of what Machinist is kind of like in Feast. It's, of course, a ranged physical job. The main sort of differences between Bard is that Bard has significantly easier to manage burst windows. You can pretty much go every sort of 3 to 5 seconds when you've got Wanderers up, and you can do big burst every 15 seconds in armies. So you've got that, and obviously you also have the silence as well, which is really nice for securing kills. Machinist kind of excels better in terms of cleave and can apply really good pressure, but it also requires you to play a few more mind games. You're a bit sort of more predictable as Machinist than you are as Bard. I mean, a lot of people say that when you've thrown your dots up as Bard, it's likely the target you're going to go on, which is often the case, but it's so much easier to bait safeguard as Bard than it is as Machinist, because you can do so much damage without even having to burst, whereas as Machinist, like, people will generally wait for Wildfire before they safeguard. I'd say that's sort of like one of the main differences, and obviously you have to manage your heat gauge. Going into overheat, for example, too early or by accident, for example, will cause you problems. Going into overheat and culling when you don't want to burst can cause serious problems. Like, if you overheat and culling, you absolutely have to get a kill, otherwise you're basically turtling for like probably the duration of like 2 culling stacks, trying to wait to get Gorse Barrel up again. So it's significantly harder to play than Bard, in my opinion, but it is also very rewarding to play. One thing to mention as well is that it's also way more reliant on latency than Bard is. That's largely because one of our hardest hitting abilities requires it to be used during certain CC, which is of course crowd control. And because of that, because of how short CC is now, like lasting 2 seconds, if your ping's too high, you will miss the CC completely, and you'll do like going into the job actions quickly. Obviously in PvE you have a combo that's based on RNG largely, so the next part of your combo is proc based, so it can be like 1-2, 1-2, it could be 1-1, 1-2, 3, for example. PvP it's completely linear, so you'll have, you know, your split shot into your slug shot into your clean shot, and you also generate heat a lot quicker in PvP. So to show an example, 55, so you get 10 heat gauge per every single part of your combo, which again is also what makes it so difficult to manage your heat gauge, because you can be waiting for burst windows, trying to deal some pressure in the meanwhile, and then next thing you know, after like a combo and a half, you've overheated by accident. So really make sure your heat gauge somewhere you can keep a close eye on it, and obviously make sure you don't overheat early. Hot shot works differently to PvE, where in PvE it gives you a flat damage increase, you refresh every minute. This isn't the purpose it serves in PvP. In PvP it serves basically to give you heat, because we don't have Gorse reloads, or no, barrel stabilizer. We don't have barrel stabilizer in PvP. So when you have less than 50 energy, Hot Shot will give you 25 energy, and it will change to cooldown after 50 energy. Using cooldown after 50 energy will obviously reduce your heat gauge by 25. Sorry, I know I'm calling it energy a lot, but it's heat gauge. So obviously when you're comboing outside of burst, make sure you always sort of throw a cooldown in between. It won't interrupt your combo, just to keep your heat gauge down. One thing to mention as well is that even if you've got ammo equipped, you will still lose heat gauge from casting cooldown. It's just one thing to bear in mind. And then you've got quick reload, which just obviously provides your ammo. So ammo works the same way it does in PvE, so it obviously reduces your GCD, or as we call it here, recast time. So obviously when you're bursting, it's good to have up and never be on 100 TP, so if you have to, like, because you're at a cap, just use some of it up. And then after that comes Blank, which is a 15 yarm knockback. Obviously I can't knock back a dummy, but it costs 250 TP, and it will knock your target back by 15 yarms, and it will deal 500 damage. Never ever use this for the damage portion, it's not worth it, it's just too expensive. It's the equivalent of using repelling shot for damage, it's pointless. And obviously because it requires you to be in melee range, you have to be in melee range for burst as it is, so people think, oh, it's logical to use blank because you're there anyway, whereas with repelling shot as barge, you're kind of not. You can just stand at 28 yards for the entire game and do damage. Don't use it for that. Use it as an interrupt, as a pill. Don't use it for anything else. Use it to stop limit breaks, especially. So if you go into calling and the melee has limit break, always keep 250 TP so you can blank the limit break. It's an absolute game changer, especially in high calling where limit break is pretty much an automatic kill. Then we've got BTE, also known as Between the Eyes, which is our hardest hitting ability theoretically. But it's only a hardest hitting ability if it's used on someone that's got bind, stun or sleep. It's usually going to be stun, because for sleep to happen you need to have a black mage, and obviously you can't have a black mage and machinist on the same team unless you're in front lines, but obviously this is geared at feast. So largely it's going to be stun. So when your tank stunned, you need to use this, but preferably, obviously don't use this every single time your tank's trying to stun to pill. Use it when you're actually bursting, because it's got a long cooldown, sort of retrospective to how long a feast game lasts. Like a feast game's 6 minutes, so you can cast BTE 12 times theoretically, but it's realistically going to be more like 8 or 9 if you're lucky. If you've got a tank that's really annoying and DRs every single target so you can't BTE, just be ready to sort of use your own stun, which I'll get to in a minute. Try never ever to use this outside of a stun. The damage it deals is not worth the recast time. Do a mini burst instead with like wildfire and like 3 shots done from quick reload or something, but don't BTE until the target's going to be stunned. And don't try to time it on bind, because bind doesn't last very long. So even though your astrology can bind for you, and sometimes this can help you land a BTE before the burst starts, again, stun is always the priority to use BTE on. Leg raise, 50% heavy, snare, whatever you want to call it, 30-second recast. Because it's free, use this whenever you can on the melee. Slow him down. If the healer's really far back and playing super safe, use heavy on him. Just run up and use heavy. It's got a nice 25-yard range in it, and if their melee goes too deep, it could potentially stop them from getting to heal them in time. So it's really worth using. And if you are against a paladin, oh my god, use this constantly on the paladin. It's just annoying as fuck. Wildfire, the bane and core of this class, which is actually a lot nicer to use in PvP because you're not trying to cram a lot of damage into an overheat window like you are in PvE. So Wildfire works similar way. Last 5 seconds. At the end of that 5 seconds, 33% of all the damage you've dealt will be dealt at the end of it. So this compiles your biggest burst windows, but it also helps you with your mini burst windows, and it also lines up with Between the Eyes as well. So in an ideal game, you can wildfire every single Between the Eyes stun. You will deal so much damage. So obviously, because of how predictable it is, because you generally have to wildfire a couple of seconds before a cooldown ends to sort of get the burst off securely, people will tend to safeguard a couple of seconds into your wildfire. So sometimes you'll be forced to burn a wildfire on another target, make them safeguard, and then burst something else, or to draw a safeguard really early into culling, and then you might have it up by culling 3 if you need it. Again, there's a lot of sort of plays to have with wildfire, and you'll sort of get used to them the longer you play Machinist for. But to play it safe as possible, wildfire whenever you do any kind of burst, preferably with Between the Eyes. But if you're going to do a 3 ammo quick burst, again, just as good. Worth mentioning, wildfire doesn't benefit from your limit break damage as far as I'm aware. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure it doesn't. So don't expect a wildfire big damage with your terminal velocity. It doesn't work that way. Flamethrower is my most favourite ability to use in PvP. It's so much more effective for us in PvP than it is in PvE. Again, be very wary. This increases your heat gauge by 10 per tick like it does in PvE. Well, sorry, in PvE it does it by 20, but in PvP it does it by 10. But obviously, 5 seconds, 50 heat gauge, so bear that in mind when using it. Clip it if it's going to make you overheat too early. I like to use Flamethrower actually a lot when I'm sort of just post overheat, when I'm waiting for Gore Spell to come back up, because this is when I do not much damage, so I can run in, try and cast a Flamethrower, and then get out again. Really, really strong during culling as well. If you can catch 2 people on it, you can almost definitely get a kill. Again, Flamethrower is something you will learn to use when and where the longer you play Machinists for. It's also good at the end of burst windows, just as a sort of a safeguard ends, because they have no defense against it, and if someone takes 5 stacks of this, they're probably going to die. Gorse Barrel, I can't use it right now because I've got Ghost Barrel already equipped, but again, works the same way it does in PvE. This in PvP gives you a 5% damage increase. It's required to use your secondary combo skills, if you will, and obviously you always want to have this up. Like in PvE, after you overheat, there's a delay before you can put Ghost back on. It lasts 10 seconds, so bear that in mind. One ability we have with Ghost Barrel equipped, which we don't have in PvE, is Stun Gun, which I'll get to shortly. And obviously you've got your Limit Break, your second tier abilities. Again, these are your bread and butter abilities that you'll use as fillers. Cooldown I already covered with Hot Shot. Right, Stun Gun. Stun Gun, it does 1000 potency to your target, your primary target, and then it cleaves your other targets in the sort of same vein that Death Flare does. Something that I forgot to mention with Flamethrower is that this has no diminishing return when you're cleaving, so it does the same damage to every single target. Anyway, back to Stun Gun. You don't use this for the damage, you use this because you want to get a stun, basically. And your tank either doesn't have it, or you're playing in sort of the lower tiers where your tank doesn't necessarily know when and where to stun, and doesn't realise that he has to stun for a Machinist. So this is your own pocket stun. Again, use with caution, use with discretion, whatever you want to say about it, because it will overheat you the second you use it. So again, whilst like in PvE, overheat gives you extra damage, you don't want to overheat for damage. It's sort of like a last resort kind of thing. Additionals, I wouldn't really change any of these. Recoup and Safeguard is meta at the moment. Recoup obviously gives you 25% of your maximum health, which is 3,250 if my math isn't shit. And Safeguard, of course, 25% shield wall, whatever you want to call it. So reduce your damage taken. These are like two meta abilities. I tried playing with Unliving for a bit, and the end result was I simply missed having the heal from Recuperate too much. It's not worth the trade. You will never ever be able to play aggressively enough to a complete stomp that you can actually take Unliving safely, and you definitely can't take it in Light Party. If you had to swap in anything, it would be Concentrate for Recoup, because this will happen. For example, I've had a lot of games against certain tanks in solo queue that know me quite well, and I wouldn't say I play very predictable, but there's only so much variation you can have with the PvP in this game. So, for example, Brian Ricardo stuns me absolutely loads. When he'll stun me every single time, he'll see me reloading, even though I'm just reloading just to do filler damage and I don't want to cap TP. Just to be safe, he'll stun me. But then, let's say there's a cooldown shortly afterwards, I'm already starting behind because I can't pre-reload or anything like that because of the stun that happened beforehand. So if you find yourself getting CC'd on a lot of burst windows, which will happen a lot when you're new to Machinists because you'll be doing generic Wildfire BTE bursts, Concentrate can be good because you can concentrate before you burst and it will prevent you getting stunned on your burst basically, which is crucial. Bolt is something that I also used to take a few seasons back. Again, it's not worth it. Don't do it. Muse is obviously useless, but if you're living in 2019 when TP and MP get merged, yeah, go ahead and take it. But as of in 2018, don't do it. Purify, not worth it. If you take any kind of sort of anti-CC, take Conk. It's much better. And plus, you'll generally have enough anticipation to use Conk, as opposed to having to Purify stun, only to not be able to between the eyes because of the game engine where you can't necessarily BTE straight after the stun because of the Purify server tick. Traits, again, I wouldn't change any of these. The 3% increased damage is not worth more than any of these. TP regen, you'll go through TP like crazy because of how reload and blank work. So I wouldn't drop this. I wouldn't drop the increased HP. Believe me, 500 HP is a lot in the grand scheme of things. It could really actually save your life. If you had to drop anything, you drop maybe the TP regen or the HP for decreased damage. I'd probably drop the increased HP. Decreased recast time is something that I also don't like dropping because again, 3 seconds of your safeguard recoup rather can make a massive difference. I'm getting this wrong. 6 seconds of your safeguard and 4.5 seconds of your recoup, if I'm not wrong. But that's a huge difference over the sort of course of the game. Right, the shorter portion of this guide is, of course, dealing damage. So, obviously, as I mentioned, you want to get to your 50 heat gauge ASAP. You don't want to be TP capped, so make sure you're always, keeping around the 600 to 400 mark. Deal damage, sort of as a filler. And then, your melee wants to go, starts a 5-second cooldown. So at this point, you want to start moving in for your burst, but sort of do damage whilst you're moving in and sort of strafe in and out. Don't make it blatantly obvious what's about to happen next. And then sort of, 3 seconds left, your wildfire's coming out, you run in, tank stunned, you BTE, and that's it, basically. And, your wildfire will expire, your damage will be dealt, keep away again, keep doing your filler damage until the next burst window comes up. If you're playing with a Dragoon that likes to burst loads, again, your TP is probably going to be quite low trying to do this over and over again, but just keep trying to support them with your damage, just keep as much pressure as possible. So that way their tank is forced to stun you and your melee rather than your healer. And if their tank's forced to stun you outside of when you're actually really bursting, again, this will help you loads when you actually want to burst, because you won't get stunned when you're trying to use between the eyes. So, factor tank hasn't got enough TP, or you're playing with a paladin that's not going to get many stuns for you. You'll be running in, you are fire, but you use your stun gun between the eyes, deal as much damage as you can during your overheat, and then that's just basically it. And obviously, let's pretend now I'm overheating, can't do much else. Dragoon calls again. I'll then try and catch a flamethrower on the melee if it's possible. If they're snared with like heavy, then of course it's a lot easier to catch a flamethrowers for a few ticks. Equip your Gorse Barrel, get back to 50 energy, you go again, that's it. And then for example, Wildfire's back up, I haven't got stun gun, so if the tank stuns for me, I'll use BTA. If he doesn't, I'll just drop a Wildfire, bunch of damage in, and I will have Wildfire back up before their safeguards back up, so we can basically hit the same target over and over again. Positions, again, playing with an Astrologian's quite good because of bind, if you can BTA binds, which is not really that possible, but obviously balance card's nice to have, ball's nice to have because you're in melee range quite a bit as Machinists, but balls generally tend to get expanded or minor arcana'd or whatever the PvP equivalent is. They basically get turned into Lady of Crowns, I think it is. Whichever the healing card is that they can turn it into. They tend to turn it into that more than casting ball. I don't play healer personally, I don't know which is more effective, but there you go. So Astrologian is good to play with, and obviously White Mage is nice to have as well. DPS wise, Dragoon can go loads. You synchronize quite well with Samurai and Monk as well, so you can pretty much play with any melee, but my personal preference is Ninja, because their sort of main burst windows are around every 30 seconds as well, and they have such flexibility with their burst windows that don't cost them a lot of TP. So for example, I like playing with Lloyd quite a bit because I can latch onto most of his bursts. They line up quite well with me. I don't like playing with Dragoon that much. They can burst so often, and it's very heavy on TP to keep reloading to support all their bursts. And obviously Samurai suffers from being able to burst loads, but also suffering from heavy TP usage to get quick amounts of burst in. So my preference is to play Ninja with Astrologian and a Warrior or Dark Knight. I don't like playing with Paladins. They have really low mobility. Warrior and Dark Knight have gap closers. Paladin does not. So Paladin's forced to play very intelligent to get sort of stuns off. But even Ash Longblade and Zegram, who are like two of the best Paladins in Europe, can't stun many of my BTAs just because of how slow Paladin is. But they do keep me alive, so that's the trade-off you make, I guess.